Today we have Worshipful Brother Erik Arneson, past master of Ashland Lodge number 23 and Esoterica Lodge number 227, sitting organist of the Research Lodge of Oregon, and current secretary and charter member of the Lewis and Clark chapter of the Philadelphia Society, doing his talk on the Illuminati and German Society, a look at Adam Weishaupt's notorious Illuminati and a historical context from Charlemagne to Taxil. Without further ado, I give you Worshipful Brother Arneson.
Hello, brothers. Just a moment while I share my screen here. Wait, that's not it.
Oh, there you go.
All right. Good evening, brothers. I'm going to give. I usually describe this talk as the most depressing of all of my Masonic talks. Not necessarily because the topic is depressing, but because a lot of people come into it being really excited about the Illuminati, and because we all have these big romantic concepts of who the Illuminati were and what they've continued to be. And then they sort of walk away being like, oh man, is history that boring? But history isn't really that boring. It's just understanding the Illuminati and their importance, and especially their importance to Freemasonry and the history of Europe kind of takes some context and some understanding. And you have to understand that there's more to history than goofy conspiracy theories. So, so first of all, I really think, so we're going to get into some context, some historical context. So the Illuminati were formed near the Holy Roman Empire, as was famously put by probably Gibbon or somebody, I don't know, was neither holy nor Roman or an empire. It was a really weird conglomeration of tons and tons of little principalities and kingdoms and city-states. And you can look on this map. I know the detail is pretty bad, but you can definitely see all the different colors and boundaries and stuff. Every single itty-bitty splotch of color, no matter how small, was a different government that existed inside the Holy Roman Empire. And they were all different sorts, right? So you'd have some that were like weird little democracies, or you'd have ones that were totally run by like bishops or archbishops. You had republics and tyrannies and kingdoms and dukedoms and all of these sorts of stuff. And then the Holy Roman Empire, sort of as a whole, was governed by the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, who really didn't have a whole lot of power, but was elected by a council of electors. And I think there were 7 of them. And each of the electors, of course, came from like the stupid, richest, most powerful families. They all hated each other. They were always fighting. There was never any surprise who the Holy Roman Emperor was going to be, but most of the time he was a powerless tool who ended up getting killed very quickly. So by the time of the 1700s, the Holy Roman Empire was really not doing super well. You had a lot of stuff that had happened, like the 30 Years' War. You had a lot of religious tension between like the Calvinists and the Lutherans and the Catholics, and they all hated each other. There were huge swaths of the Holy Roman Empire who, because of like weird religious tension, had just sort of stifled social advancement and social progression. So the place where we're going to be focusing, Bavaria, the Kingdom of Bavaria, which is part of that big, can you see my mouse? Nope. Oh wait. So this big, where's Bavaria? It's over here. This white chunk over here. A big piece, I guess it's blue, of the empire down there. It was under the control of really strict Catholics, mostly very conservative and not very forward thinking, who had kind of like squashed the progression of education so badly that the European Enlightenment was sort of going on around them, and it wasn't really leaking in. And this was a really big problem, and really sort of informs why the Illuminati ended up taking hold there and becoming so important. So another thing that was happening at this time, and one of the reasons why progress wasn't very forthcoming, is there was a lot of tension in the empire between two really large powers, really wealthy, powerful powers, Austria in the south and Prussia up in the north, who were both trying. They had, you know, long running political families who kind of ran everything. Austria was run by the Habsburgs. Prussia, I don't remember who was running Prussia, but they were totally playing like this horrible game of Risk, where they were always, you know, converting all of the little municipalities against each other and trying to get as many as possible on their side, and just sort of trying to have as much political power as possible. And this was bad. There was so it was a mess. It was a huge mess. And this period of the history of the Holy Roman Empire is frequently referred to as German dualism. Not in the exciting, like, mystical sense of dualism, but in the dualism as in there were two powers, Austria and Prussia, who were trying to control everything and just continually messing up everything for everybody else. So this was also the period of time when Freemasonry started to become a thing. England, the first public Grand Lodge happened in England in 1717. It spread throughout Europe fairly quickly, and it really didn't take long before it made its way to Italy. It made its way into Catholic countries, and there were two things that Freemasonry kind of preached that the Catholic Church really took a lot of offense to. So the first papal encyclical against Freemasonry was issued in 1738 by Clement XII, In Ementi Apostolatus. It condemned Freemasonry for being a threat to governments, claiming that they do not hold by either civil or canonical sanctions, that it feigned the appearance of natural honesty. It condemned us for having secrecy and oaths. And there were a couple of really great quotes. One of them is, "For if they were not acting wickedly, they should never have such great hate for the light." And which voice has continually become more frequent that in many regions the above-mentioned societies have appeared for a long time to be outlawed by the secular authorities as being in adverse to the security of the realms and providentially banned. In 1751, Benedict IV issued Providos Romanorum, which again condemned us for secrecy, but also condemned us for a few things that are kind of ridiculous. One of them is religious indifference. Freemasonry was at the time accepting any sort of Christian, so you could be Catholic, Protestant, Lutheran, Anglican, any variety of Christian could join. And I believe by 1751, Freemasonry had even started admitting Jews and Muslims. So the Catholics were sort of like, whoa, 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 hold on, this is how it works. They also condemned Freemasonry for the oath taking. They condemned it because they claimed that Freemasonry was opposed to civil law, and also because in Europe nobody had a right to free assembly. The Catholic Church was like, nobody has the right to just assemble whenever they want. Therefore, Freemasonry should be illegal everywhere, which, of course, we think now is pretty ridiculous, since the right of free assembly is something that our country is kind of based on. The Pope accused everybody connected with the Masons of being depraved and perverted. So by this time, it's also pretty obvious. So by this time, you still have Freemasonry really flourishing in a lot of like heavily Catholic places. So it's almost like these papal encyclicals were being issued and kind of ignored. But the feeling was there. Freemasonry was this weird secret thing. The secrecy was still really strong, especially on the continent, and in Germany. Oh, we'll get there in a second. Let's talk about Bavaria, down there in southern Germany, where Oktoberfest happens and all the best beer comes from. 18th century Bavaria, partially because of the way that the Enlightenment had kind of skirted around it, hadn't really advanced much. It was a heavily agrarian society. Most of the people were peasants or serfs, and serfdom was a holdover of like medieval feudalism that really never got entirely eradicated until, you know, the 1840s, 1850s. And it was a very restricted way of life. They didn't really have freedom of movement or freedom of assembly or freedom of religion even. All across the Holy Roman Empire, a bunch of these little principalities, they didn't have freedom of religion. Um, but they did, after I think the 30 Years' War, come to a place where they were like, okay, well then, no freedom of religion, but the ruler of that town or state gets to decide what religion everybody is. So in Bavaria, you were Catholic. There's no question. You had to be. If you weren't, you were basically an outlaw. So life basically revolved around the Catholic Church and farming. But there were also a lot of wars and skirmishes. Bavaria was about 60% owned by Catholic monasteries. Um, and uh, and we had a weird time at the end of the 18th century because this is sort of when the beginning of the emancipation of serfs began. It didn't complete for a while, but it started there. There was also ridiculous wealth inequality. So you've got a picture here of like your typical 18th century Bavarian town, and you'll notice bare feet, dirt, animals everywhere. Nothing looks like it's in very good shape. It's filthy, and you know, it's peasant life. This building was also built in the 18th century by the royalty. It's almost like a joke when you compare it to like 18th century royalty in Bavaria. Um, they they basically were allowed to own land. The Junkers were German nobility in the 18th century. Government was becoming increasingly centralized as you know, through intermarriage and wealth acquisition and all of that stuff. And again, they were just stupid wealthy. And Freemasonry in Germany at this time was kind of a pastime of the wealthy. It was the rich people who were becoming Masons. Initiation fees were exorbitant. The only people who could afford like the clothing, the free time, and the travel were the wealthy. And so they were basically like they were like country clubs for rich weirdos. But it was also a crazy scene for Freemasonry. Part of this is probably because there was no central government. There was no sense of German unity or any of that sort. So of course there was no like one Grand Lodge. Every little area and region had its own Grand Lodge or collection of lodges. And it was nuts. So we can go down the list here. Some of these actually still exist, but in German Freemasonry, you also didn't really have standardized ritual, right? So lodges would join a Grand Lodge, but they kind of got to pick which ritual they were using. And so some of the Grand Lodges we had, the Grand Lodge of the Eclectic Union is kind of a little later, like that's after the Illuminati mostly. But the rest of these, there were probably a dozen or more Grand Lodges in the Holy Roman Empire. And because of the lack of uniformity in the ritual, there were a number of different rites that ended up sort of coalescing and being you know, represented there. And rites would sort of, as they became more organized, they would kind of go out of their way to politic and get lodges to adopt their ritual. I'm sorry. So there was sort of always this move, like this weird power play inside Freemasonry for one rite to kind of like come out on top and be like the rite that controlled German Freemasonry. So we're still talking, this is probably like the 1770s, before the Illuminati existed. So there were a couple like really big, exciting movers and shakers in here. One of the big ones that still exists today was the Swedish Rite. which was brought into Germany by Johann Wilhelm von Zinnendorf. And it's still going today, and it's the main ritual and rite for most of the Scandinavian Grand Lodges, maybe all of them. Another one, and one that I think needs a lot more attention, is the rite of strict observance. You'll hear about strict observance a lot, but nobody ever really seems to pay enough attention to them. Apparently there's lots of German literature about them, but some of the big movers and shakers in this one were Marshal von Bieberstein, Karl Gotthelf Hund, and Johann Augusta von Stark. Von Hund, or Hund was the big one. He was this German mystic. He encouraged really aggressive growth. The rite of strict observance was moving across the Holy Roman Empire quickly and trying to like suck up as many lodges as it could. Hund was so when you joined the strict observance, you swore fealty to the rite of strict observance, but you also swore fealty to the unknown superiors, who were like mystical dead Templars and Freemasons who were in spiritual contact with Karl Hund. And so Hund had sort of declared himself the provincial grand master of wherever he was, and he was sort of like the head of the rite of strict observance. But the whole system of strict observance was predicated upon this legend they had that they were the direct descendants of the Knights Templar, that they held the secrets of the Templars, that they had the lineage of the Templars in them, and that Karl Hund was in contact with these unknown superiors who were giving him spiritual instruction. But of course, he was the only one who could talk to them. Another really exciting one, the Brethren of the Rose-Croix of Gold, otherwise known as the Golden Rosicrucians. They were founded, depending on who you believe, they were either founded in 1777 or before the Grand Lodge of England ever happened in 1717. They were small but significant. They claimed descent from the Rosicrucians, and et cetera, et cetera. They were a pretty big contender. I think I get the impression that in this particular era, in the 1780s, like the three most interesting players in the German Freemasonry were the Rite of Strict Observance, the Golden Rosicrucians, and the Illuminati. So there's a lot to look into there. I haven't found enough information on the Golden Rosicrucians yet. I would love to find some stuff, I guess, in German or English about it. All right, so now let's get into our exciting Illuminati characters, right? The first and probably, oops, that's a bad slide. The first and probably the most well-known is Johann Adam Weishaupt, who was born in 1748, died in 1830. He was a really, really brilliant kid. He got interested in philosophy young. He went to the University of Ingolstadt. So this is another interesting bit of history. The University of Ingolstadt was a fairly well-known and fairly old university, and it had been controlled and run by the Jesuits for who knows how long, hundreds of years, who knows. In the early 1770s, the Jesuits were disbanded by the Pope. So by the time Weishaupt became a member of the faculty there, this old stodgy university was filled with a bunch of ex-Jesuits who hadn't really changed their ways. But the university, especially in descriptions I've seen of how it was run, it hadn't really advanced its method of teaching and learning, and seemed to be kind of like, it was kind of stuck in the 17th century, maybe stuck in the 16th century. So it was they like went to great pains to censor a lot of stuff. They banned tons of books. They prevented their students from reading a lot of newer stuff, but also older stuff that was interesting. they kind of like banned any sort of classical text that had pagan imagery or portrayals of you know, a lascivious nature, you know, like sex and stuff. Um, so so Weishaupt was really, so he got a lot of extracurricular education, and when he came back to the university to teach, he was he had the fire in his veins. Like he wanted to reform stuff, he wanted to make it better, he wanted to be like an actual educator. He was he became, in fact, the dean of faculty law when he was just 27 years old, and he felt like he was sort of the leader of the liberal cause at the university. He did things like lecture in German instead of Latin, which was scandalous. He kept trying to bring um, banned books into the university, which got him into trouble over and over again. And he was a professor, so he wasn't like wealthy, and he also wasn't a canon or a priest or any of that sort. So he was a layperson professor, a layperson, and so he eventually sort of was like he wanted to be more radical. He made friends with a fellow kind of like philosopher who he discovered was a Freemason, and he started learning about Freemasonry. And he was really enamored of it. You know, this idea of like a secret brotherhood of virtuous, you know, philosophers who were trying to like change mankind for the better. But he thought, you know, after a little bit more study and talking to his friends, he thought Freemasonry was A, too expensive, you know, because only rich people could afford to get in, and B, not radical enough, which I can admire. Um, so just to give a little bit of context to this era, so we're still looking at like the 1770s. Elsewhere in the Holy Roman Empire, you had thinkers like Goethe, Schiller, um, people like that. You basically the Enlightenment was coming to the Holy Roman Empire. It just wasn't penetrating Bavaria. Bavaria was just stuck in the past. So I think in a way, Weishaupt probably thought that he could be, you know, the Goethe of Bavaria. I don't think that his writing was ever good enough, but he certainly could have tried. And this was currently, let's see, it was Maximilian III was the current Duke of Bavaria. Um, yeah. All right. So anyhow, Weishaupt started to get interested in this concept of like a mysterious secret society filled with like philosophers who would bring, you know, new knowledge and the Enlightenment to his ignorant home state, and he sort of started designing the Illuminati then. He kind of, in some of his writings, apparently he kind of became disillusioned with Freemasonry right away, because it turns out that there were plenty of exposés about Freemasonry in the 1700s if you just knew where to look, and there were like 5 or 6 really big ones that had already been published in German. And when he read the ritual and he saw, he was like, he basically was like, if they are supposed to be this secret society with all this secret wisdom, how much good can they be if all of their secrets are already exposed? I think one of the big criticisms you can have of Weishaupt is that he never became um, deeply versed in Freemasonry, at least enough that he was able to really understand what it was about. But he definitely based the structure of the Illuminati as he began to form it around what Freemasonry was. So he founded the Illuminati on May 1st, 1776. And the next year in 1777, he did become a Freemason. He was initiated into Loge zur Behutsamkeit, which means prudence, the Lodge of Prudence. And he never advanced beyond the fellowcraft in traditional Freemasonry, though he did, of course, design his own Master Mason degree in the Illuminati. We'll get to that in a second. So at some point in Weishaupt's Masonic journey, he encountered this amazing character, um, Adolf Freiherr Knigge. So Knigge was a hoot. He first of all was like a super Freemason nerd. Like he loved Freemasonry. He studied it like crazy. He knew the ins and outs. He understood the philosophy. He was way into like the crazy mystical stuff. I don't know that he necessarily cared about social progress or anything like that, but he loved his mystery. And so Knigge was, he and Weishaupt got along really, really well at first. In 1773, Knigge became a Freemason, and the Loge zum Gekronten Löwen, which means the Lodge of the Crowned Lion, which is a really cool name, and I feel like we should have lodge names that cool. And he was kind of big news. Knigge actually was a pretty influential writer, and some of his books on like etiquette and social niceties are still read today in Germany. So Knigge is remembered way more for being a like a Emily Post than a spooky Freemason. He joined the Illuminati in 1780, and he just set about rewriting and expanding on all the rituals. So he was basically the guy who wrote so the Illuminati has a bunch of rituals, but it definitely has like an entered apprentice, fellowcraft, master mason. There's like Scottish Knight. There's a bunch of them. I can read the table of contents to you afterwards. You can listen to them all. But he was sort of a philosopher. He believed that the rights of man should be. He argued that the rights of man could be derived from reason as well as from God. He thought that man's purpose was to ensure not only his own happiness but the happiness of others. But he also thought that it was not okay for one man to infringe on the rights of others. He had a very strong sense of justice. He and Weishaupt got along for a few years, but by 1884, Knigge was kind of fed up and had left the Illuminati. All right, so into the Illuminati. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to get the background of this slide to update, so I don't know why it doesn't match the rest of them. It's probably an Illuminati plot. I'm sorry that I didn't spend more time figuring that out. All right, the Bavarian Illuminati, founded May 1st, 1776. So we're looking at what it was their anniversary not too long ago. It was founded by a couple of guys. It was Adam Weishaupt, we already mentioned, and then Franz Xaver von Zwack. They kind of weaseled their way into Freemasonry a little bit. They had 5 people in 1776. By 1778, get this, they'd expanded to 27 members across 5 cities. So they weren't really taking off. It wasn't like a rocket ship of Masonic delight or anything. They basically in 2 years added 22 people across 5 cities. By 1779, the Illuminati became a recognized Masonic lodge, or what we might call a mother lodge, with the ability to charter its own lodges that would also be recognized by Freemasonry. In 1780, Knigge joined, and Knigge was sort of excited by some of the stuff he was seeing in Freemasonry, and it wasn't very long before Knigge sort of like hit the top, and he's like, okay, I'm ready for the next degree. And Weishaupt is like, well, nobody's written those yet. So Knigge had his work cut out for him. Knigge made a new system of 3 classes of 3 degrees each. However, nobody ever made it to the most upper degrees, and they were probably never written. At least I don't think we have copies of them. Knigge and Weishaupt were both interested in Masonic reform, but as you can see from what we went over earlier, it was kind of from different angles. Weishaupt was really interested in bringing sort of like Enlightenment ideals and rational thought and rationalist philosophy to the like backwards, I'm going to put it in quotes, backwards parts of the Holy Roman Empire. Whereas Knigge was sort of like already embracing this sort of enlightenment, like, you know, the rights of man being derived from reason, sort of lofty talk sort of stuff. But Knigge was also more into the mystical side of Freemasonry, and Weishaupt didn't really give a crap about that. Um, so so the Illuminati as an esoteric system requires that we kind of talk about what we mean when we talk about esoteric stuff. And Brother Sean Iyer has sort of like broken esotericism into like categories, right? The most basic form of esotericism being just the fact that we have secrets. Freemasonry definitely falls into this category in almost all of its forms, where we have, you know, secret rituals, the handshakes, the modes of recognition, the whole initiatory thing, the secret meetings, like that is the most literal definition of esoteric. The most weird form of esoteric, and the stuff that I think a lot of Masons, at least in Oregon, are kind of interested in, is the sense of esotericism that is tied into the Western mystery tradition. You know, the esoteric as in, it's not hidden by man as much as it is hidden by the mystical nature of the universe. And that, you know, Freemasonry or whatever esoteric system should be revealing mystical secrets or pursuing mystical knowledge. The Illuminati was very much anti-esotericism in that sense, and very pro-rationalism, pro-materialism, and pro the boring side of the Enlightenment. The Illuminati wanted to be a force for rational thought and rational knowledge and rational advancement. They weren't interested in the mystical stuff. They never were interested in, like, you know, the unknown superiors of the strict observance or any of that stuff. But they went about it in kind of a backhanded way, where the Illuminati degrees started with espousing all of these mystical concepts, but then in, you know, by the time you got to like the third or fourth degree, they basically pulled the carpet out from under you, said all of this mystical stuff is bullpucky, and you can certainly understand that there are certain truths, holy truths, but these are truths that enlighten man about his past, present, and future condition. I'm reading a quote. They most certainly exist. Call them revelation or what you will, whether they are the results through research or communications from the hands of higher beings. Enough! Any intelligent man is bound to feel that he requires them, because he remains in doubt about so many things in nature. That is a direct quote from Adam Weishaupt. Basically, Adam Weishaupt was like, yes, you're supposed to feel wonder. You're supposed to feel these sorts of doubts about things. That doesn't mean that there's a mystical revelation. It just means you're supposed to use your brain and just observe the world around you. We're not mystics. We're Christian, but we're rationalists. Which is very counter to the picture that we are painted of the Illuminati once we start getting into the conspiracy theory stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, so now we're going to get to whatever the heck happened to the Illuminati, because they really don't exist anymore, unfortunately. By 1782, oh yeah, somebody died. Who was it that died? It was Hund. The guy who ran the strict observance died. That was Karl Hund. So Karl Hund died, I think, in like 1781 or something like that. And they just kind of crumbled. The strict observance, which had really been spreading and gaining a lot of traction and was sort of like on the road to controlling some of the larger Grand Lodge organizations in the Holy Roman Empire, really fell apart once Hund died, and it turned out, oh look, there are no unknown superiors. Like, first of all, there was historical research that showed that there was no provable connection between the strict observance and the Templars. And second, somebody probably just woke up one day and was like, this strict observers thing, it kind of sounds like, or this secret secret masters thing, it really sounds like he's just putting us on. Sure enough, they weren't there. With Hund out of the way, the Red District observance crumbled and left kind of a big power vacuum. They'd already sort of had a lot of infighting and conflict with the Illuminati. The Illuminati, as their own right, had also sort of started their own bid to kind of take over and become like the dominant right in German Freemasonry. But they sort of started to fall apart too. 1782, the convent of Wilhelmsbad was sort of like a place where the three biggest contenders kind of got together and made a little bit of a treaty with each other, but it didn't help. By 1783, the Golden Rosicrucians had gained control of one of the major Grand Lodges in the Holy Roman Empire, the Grand Lodge of Three Globes, which I believe still exists today. And by this time, depending on whose research you're reading, the Illuminati had grown to somewhere between 650 and 2,500 members, although nobody really knew, I guess, or we can't tell anymore. By 1784, Knigge and Weishaupt started quarreling, and Knigge left the order. He remained a Freemason, but he did not remain part of the Illuminati. By 1785, there was some political scandal. Karl Theodor, who gained control in Bavaria. The Golden Rosicrucians and the Jesuits sort of teamed up against the Illuminati, because remember, the Illuminati were basically a counter-Catholic organization working to bring Enlightenment ideals into a strictly Catholic-controlled area. But they leaked information to the government in Austria. Oh, that's where Karl Theodor was. They leaked information to Karl Theodor's government in Austria that the Illuminati... never mind. Let me back up a second here. Karl Theodor was in Bavaria. I don't have written down who was in charge of Austria, but they leaked information to Karl Theodor that the Illuminati were conspiring with Austria against Bavaria, which was bad. It might not have been true, but Karl Theodor believed it enough that he basically brought the full force of his government enforcement down on Freemasonry. Karl Theodor was the Elector of Bavaria in 1785. He basically crushed the Illuminati, raided all their offices, got all their papers, all their records, all their membership information. There was a lot of scandal. People were forced to quit. The Illuminati were entirely disbanded. Karl Theodor took all of their stuff. He got all their papers. Most of it is in print now. In addition, this is a really bad time for secret societies everywhere. Even Freemasonry in England ran into a little bit of trouble. In England, they had the Unlawful Oaths Act in 1797, and then the Unlawful Societies Act in 1799. And Freemasonry only survived because they had become they had done such a good job crossing social boundaries that there were a lot of MPs who were Freemasons and sort of stood up and were like, let's make an exception for these guys. They have the best spaghetti dinners. You guys wouldn't believe it. That was a joke. Nobody laughed. Oh, you're all muted. Okay. And secret societies kind of continued to be in trouble for a little while. Even on our side of the pond, we had the William Morgan affair in 1826 that really hurt Freemasonry in America. So by 1785 or shortly thereafter, the Illuminati had been entirely disassembled. Weishaupt had abandoned them and turned ownership over to some other guy. Knigge had left. All their members sort of gone away. Like, there was nothing left. The Illuminati ceased to exist. Even if they did exist, they were a force for the introduction of Enlightenment ideals to Bavaria and other states in the Holy Roman Empire, which really wasn't a bad thing. That kind of was a good thing for for all of the serfs and peasants. All right, so let's talk about what happened after that. So the Illuminati were gone, but in the 19th century, Freemasonry started to get in a lot of political hot water on the European continent. So we already talked about like secret societies being in trouble. This forced a lot of masonry underground in places. And probably one of my favorite stories is Freemasonry in Italy, which also was not a thing yet. Italy wasn't a thing. It was a bunch of separate city-states. Big swaths of Italy were controlled by the church. But Freemasonry sort of helped form, or at least informed, the organization of the Carbonari, who were a revolutionary secret society across Italy. There were some really big people in the Italian civil wars and fights for unification that were prominent Freemasons, probably the best known being Giuseppe Garibaldi. And this threatened the Pope a lot. Like the Pope was losing so much power because of all this stuff. He kind of lashed out at secret societies, in particular the Freemasons and the Carbonari, who he grouped into one thing. And a succession of popes published something like 17 anti-Masonic encyclicals before 1902. Some of them extremely whiny, most of them condemning Freemasonry for encouraging democracy and freedom of religion, which it's almost hilarious to read. Like they're really weird, the kind of stuff that the Pope is condemning Freemasonry for. So there was a lot of hype, anti-Masonic hype, and so Leo Taxil is this fabulously awful historical character who was a notorious anti-Catholic author in late 1800s in France, who made a really public conversion to Catholicism after Leo XIII published his papal bull against Freemasonry in 1884. So Taxil basically dredged this Illuminati story out of history and associated them with mysticism, esotericism, and mystery schools. By this time, Taxil had already joined a Masonic lodge, but then been kicked out because of poor conduct. And so then he started publishing these books about Freemasonry filled with like these fictional accounts of satanic rituals. And this fictional character named Diana Vaughan, who was supposedly a descendant of Thomas Vaughan, who was a 17th century sort of Renaissance man dude who was really interested in the Rosicrucians. He said that Diana Vaughan and Albert Pike were friends, that they belonged to this secret Illuminati called the Regenerated Palladium. And he's sort of the one that first started associating Freemasonry with Satanism, with Baphomet, with all that sorts of stuff. Eventually, he did admit that it was all a hoax, but it was too late. He had already captured the public imagination. His sort of like fiction presented as fact had already made its poisonous way into the fabric of Western society. And so to this day, Taxil's books are quoted by lots of conspiracy theorists, including stuff about the Illuminati, including stuff about Freemasonry and Satanism. There's that famous non-quote about Albert Pike praising Lucifer. Like there's all this stuff that came out of Taxil. But he's sort of the granddaddy of every Illuminati conspiracy theory, and it really, unfortunately, does not reflect reality at all. The Illuminati were not what Taxil said they were. They were never mystical. They were not a mystery school. They were not into esotericism. They were proponents of Enlightenment philosophy and Enlightenment thinking who failed because of infighting and lasted less than 10 years. So that's the depressing part, is that you get to the end of the talk and you're like, that's it? What about Dan Brown? You guys, all we get is a Dan Gray, no Dan Brown. So I want to dedicate this talk to Brother Jeva Singh Anand, who was really instrumental in bringing a lot of German research on the Illuminati into the English language. And he was a really cool guy who left us way too early. So keep his memory in your mind. Do not forget this brother. He was incredible. All right. Thank you guys. I'm totally open for questions. You can go to that URL and get the slides, but I think they're like slides from 5 years ago.
I've unmuted everybody, and I'll go ahead and turn on the comments on the live stream so the people viewing there can message and ask questions.
Ooh, there's been a chat. Okay,
there has been a chat, so there's a few comments there.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the chat, so let me see if there were any questions.
Can we have comments?
Tyler asked, the first group just mentioned, that was probably the strict observance, right? A strict observance.
No, Swedish
Rite.
Rite.
The Swedish Rite. Yeah, the Swedish Rite is still in existence today. Okay, Milwaukee asked how they were chartered and able to be a Grand Lodge. So one of the really important things to remember about this period of time is there was no standard for what made something a Grand Lodge, really. We're talking about really early on, before Freemasonry had really developed a lot of those standards. And on the continent, basically, if you had the money and enough lodges, you could organize a Grand Lodge. But also, there was, oh, you're muted, Rich. Oh, Nate might have to unmute you.
He's unmuted.
Got it. Here we go. So they were able to, they basically syndicated lodges at that time?
Yeah. So the Illuminati never became a Grand Lodge, but the original lodge of the original Illuminati Masonic Lodge did have the ability to charter new lodges.
And so that did take place at that time? There was some sub-lodges? Okay.
Yeah, in English Freemasonry, those were referred to as mother lodges. A mother lodge can make new lodges. And it's only nowadays that we reserve the chartering of new lodges for Grand Lodges.
Yeah, I was just curious, though, because there was separate Illuminati charters then at that time that branched out, is what I'm trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and then my other question, I know it sounds silly, but is that a white horse on his left shoulder?
Who? Where?
Back on that other slide, it was Weishaupt's buddy that left the order. I can't remember his name. Nigga, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it does look like on his epaulette, that does look like a little white horse. I don't know, it was probably the insignia of a military thing or a family crest or something. Because he was in the military. He had a military medal on. So that's probably what that was.
Was Frederick the Great hanging around after this?
No, he was dead.
He was before this? Okay.
Yeah, he would have been Frederick the Great was more contemporary with Newton. So he would have been like, he probably died like 60 years before this, 50 years before this.
Cool.
So I have a question, Tyler. In other presentations I've watched, I've heard it's more of they made it sound like the Illuminati was like trying to infiltrate, the Masonic lodges, etc. But it sounds like what you're saying is it was more of they just existed with them, kind of. It wasn't quite as diabolical. They were just kind of another lodge, not nefarious necessarily. Is that kind of the gist? Make sure.
Yeah, I would say that saying that they were trying to infiltrate and influence Freemasonry is really downplaying the fact that everybody was doing that. So it was kind of like, imagine if in Oregon, we had a Grand Lodge in every county. And you basically got to be the king of Oregon Freemasonry if your Masonic ritual was practiced in as many of those Grand Lodges as possible. So then like the Scottish Rite and the York Rite both show up and they're both like, okay, how can we get as many lodges as possible to do our ritual? Because whichever one of us gets the most lodges doing our shit, we're the winner. So that's kind of what was going on. And the Illuminati, strict observance, the Golden Rosicrucians, they were all trying to do that.
Thank you. That's a good way to think about it. Appreciate it.
Can I?
I guess.
May I?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Eric, I want to really, really, really congratulate you for the structure of your lecture. You got me really 100%. I got to give a lot of kudos to you.
Thanks.
And the reason why is because it's a period of history, the run up to the Illuminati, what the Bavaria, when you singled out Bavaria, because I see that generally as the squabbles between Frederick the Great and Maria Theresa, the Habsburgs, and you know, and some of the real big wars of Europe. Well, I have to tell you, before we get on to England and the Illuminati and all that, that it's I am predisposed towards French history, and when I take out the about 1715 to about 1750 fascinates me, Bavaria. And the battles between those two, the Silesian Wars between Frederick the Great and Maria Theresa. I saw some of the greatest things were happening in Europe. But but apart from my fascination for that and how you handled it, I particularly like, and I'm going to get you off camera, I like to talk to you a little bit about the Catholic Church. I like it, I almost laugh. The Catholic Church against what the hell they didn't like about Masonry is because, I like what you said, the oath taking of Masonry was at the crux of the dislike and mistrust that Catholicism had, the hierarchy of Catholicism had against Masonry, this damn oath taking. I like when you brought that up. But I had to throw in that you wiped off when you left out the ornery nature, the haphazard Masonry development, and I thought, hey, Eric I thought that the people who had rituals all over the place was the Scottish Masonry. I mean, within 50 miles of radius, you had the people who diversify rituals were not so much the Europeans, but were the Scottish. I had to throw that in. And as I said, this is I'm painting with a broad brush here. How do you pronounce Weishaupt? How do you pronounce his name?
Weishaupt.
Weishaupt. And Kege. Were these the patron saints of the Illuminati? Those two names I just called there.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good way to look at them.
Yeah. And so they were and would you say that they consider themselves the torch bearers? The torch bearers morphed into the Templars. The Templars. Am I right in understanding your presentation with these?
Well, the strict observance was a competing rite, and they claimed to be descended from the Templars.
Okay. And I need some of those notes because I got a little scrapbook here now, and then I go back to what I particularly liked about it. As you being the torch bearer around Portland here for the Illuminati. Laughing. What kind of sacrilegious laugh is that?
Smack.
If anybody wants a better picture of this stuff, like this is the book to get. The Secret School of Wisdom.
Yeah.
The Authentic Rituals and Doctrines of the Illuminati by Joseph Vegas, Reinhard Machner, and Javis Singh Anand. I'll make sure to email this to the Research Lodge list, but basically this is so one of the weird things about the Illuminati, and it's so strange how they've been so mythologized in the English speaking world. In the German world, there's been scholarly research into the Illuminati since the middle of the 1800s. Like, there's never been they've known what all of this is about forever, but nobody's ever really there hasn't been a whole lot of academic research into the Illuminati here until about recently. So this came out in 2015. Probably the first scholarly articles that I've found about it were Brother Java's articles in the Philalethes Journal in like 2014. So it's really only been like 5 or 6 years since Illuminati, like original Illuminati stuff, has been available in English.
Thank you. But again, before I shut my mouth and go sip a coffee, I would like you to print out for me your definition of esotericism.
Okay, I will.
You did it beautifully, and I would like you to kindly send me.
Okay.
That I like that esotericism.
All right, I use Sean Ayer's definition of esotericism when discussing Freemasonry. So I will figure out where the heck that is and send that to you.
I would appreciate that very much. But again, I'm going to shut my mouth and go step off for a minute. And you did a damn great. I'm so proud of what you did, man.
Hey, thank you, brother. It's a delight to see you.
Well structured, starting from the run up to the run up to Illuminati, the background, and the welding together. But you left out, for me, which is my pet peeve, you left out Scottish Freemasonry, because my neighbors.
Well, Scottish Freemasonry was doing its own thing, but by this time it had started to congeal, right? It had started to become pretty structured. But the Illuminati did have a Scottish Knight degree. That makes you feel any better. Like 6th degree.
However, I'm going to slip off for 1 second, go have a sip of coffee, and come back.
All right.
Eric, did you come across in your research anything that indicates the original Masonic founding fathers in America having any influence from the Illuminati order in Bavaria?
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. They wouldn't have had time, and they probably wouldn't have paid attention.
I've come across one article about George Washington saying that he didn't think that very many people in America were buying into it or interested in it.
I don't know that it would have been a problem, right? Like, America was founded on a lot of Enlightenment ideals already, so they didn't really need the Illuminati. And I've come across that article, that quote or that article before too, but it's usually taken way out of context, and it's usually something that's looked at by conspiracy theorists who wouldn't really be looking at what George Washington would have known about the Illuminati.
Yeah, I've also heard of a conversation between Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson about it, where Benjamin Franklin kind of dismissed Thomas Jefferson, who was trying to bring up all this Illuminati stuff, and went, yeah, that's already in Masonry in America, and we're already going to put it into the ideas here, so don't worry about it.
That raises an interesting question, though, about the influence of other rites on American Freemasonry, because American Freemasonry is different than a UGLE Freemasonry. I mean, the ritual is different, or Irish or Scottish. So it does have influences from the other rites, from the Swedish rite, perhaps not.
I don't think that we have influence from the Swedish rite. I think it's probably more likely that the Swedish rite received their influences from the same place we did.
Yeah.
Our ritual is pretty well traced, and if you read Bob Davis's book, The Mason's Words, it's probably the best treatment of the history of our ritual. But we know that in the 1800s, American Freemasons across the continent were bickering and fighting with each other over whose ritual was the closest to William Preston's original intent. So So we know kind of what we wanted our influences to be, and we also know where a lot of that came from.
Is the Swedish Rite still connected to Freemasonry?
Yeah. In fact, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland all practice the Swedish Rite, I believe. And there's also a Grand Lodge in Germany that uses the Swedish Rite.
I wanted to mention that Norm Peterson, a member of Research Lodge, has studied the Swedish Rite extensively. He considers himself to be Swedish. And if you wanted a lecture on Swedish Rite, he's written a number of articles on it.
Yeah.
Dan, you'd have to talk to the worshipful master about that.
Oh, I never thought of that.
All right, brothers, is there any other questions?
I said all the nice things about Erik already. I don't. If I continue to talk,
I'm going to be flying high on that all day, Brother Joseph.
Reverse.
That's good. Good job, man.
I have a question for you, Erik.
All right.
When I was looking through the same book that you took most of your lecture from, I was wondering who the Areopagites were.
I didn't actually take my lecture from that book. I took it mostly from Java's articles in the Philalethes.
Okay.
So I don't know.
It was mentioned that they had to seek their approval for something at one point in the introduction.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, well, who are they? And there's no explanation as to who they are. I'm like, well, that's kind of the hole that I'd like to.
I have no idea.
Aren't they just judges, like the type of judge back then?
Well, this is 1781. The Areopagites that you might be thinking of were like back in the Greek times.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be a couple thousand years earlier.
Send me the page number. I'll check it out.
I'll have to find it, but I was just wondering if you knew, because it was something to do with like the Scottish degree.
Yeah, I don't know.
That they were doing.
So there's a comment made about rechartering or opening a Illuminati lodge. So unfortunately, brothers, this is a book about the American Illuminati. They are actually called the Sacred College. What is it? I had it here. They're the Sacred College of the Ancient Mysteries, and they were chartered in the early 1900s in America, and they actually still own the copyrights to all the American Illuminati rituals. And they still have some kind of lodges or something today, but they're not the Illuminati as far as the Bavarian one. But
what are they called again, brother?
They are called the... Hold on.
What's the name of that book?
This is the Sacred College of the Ancient Mysteries. And this is just this is a book of one of their meetings that was held in 1917. It was published by Clymer, so they still own the copyrights and all the Illuminati stuff in America.
So does Clymer have the copyright?
That no longer exists, but that order still exists, and they've been trying to sue all the fake Illuminati organizations across the country for the rights to it because they have precedence.
So Erik, it was on page 30, and the quote is during his negotiations with the Areopagites, which took place in early December, it was only Knigge who presented a draft of the decree, which was duly approved. In Weishaupt's opinion, however, the issue was not fully resolved. He kept hinting at a version of his own, thus causing some confusion.
So was the Areopagites an order that was just transposed into Germany from Greece then? Is that what they're referring to?
I don't know who they are at all.
Probably.
There's some kind of council to be able to discuss the decree, right?
Well, so it seems like a council that would be suggesting that they would give approval for them to do their certain Scottish style table lodge or something.
Right. That's interesting though. It's cool that you have the context of that debate between those two individuals too.
Well,
it's like minutes,
Yeah, inside of Knigge and Weishaupt's relationship, they were trying to get some sort of degree approved. But then as they got approval, the guy goes, well, I don't know, I think we need to rewrite it. I'm like, what? Some crates. So Knigge was like definitely pushing towards more of a Christian background for the Illuminati, I think, and that might have been part of their rift.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see.
Well, you'd think that Weishaupt being Jesuit would be cool with that, right? Or did he have like an allergic?
Well, I think that he was. I think that he worked at this previously Jesuit college, and that he was a very controversial figure in that college, and that they always looked at him with suspicion, and that was one of the things that caused the ultimate quote unquote disbanding of his degree system, was because he had so much derision from the Jesuits that he was working under.
Why
he had to be really careful at work, basically.
Why do you think Knigge was trying to be Christian with it?
Well, he's probably a Prussian sort of like military.
Oh, Holy Roman Empire.
Well, because all of the Prussian royalty at that time were typically well studied in the arts of war. Mm-hmm. And the Junker class was definitely sort of like Prussian nobility. Even Bismarck comes from that kind of lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So the Areopagites in Bavaria were the ruling class of Bavaria. That's what they called them at that time.
Oh, really?
Oh, okay. So the ruling class would have been giving these guys charters, is what it seems like then. So they would go to like the prince or the king, Frederick.
Well,
for a charter stamp, is what you're thinking, Nate?
Let's see. This is actually. Let me see. It says Knigge statutes provided that only a small number of members were to be admitted to the grade of prince. Oh, so no, the Areopagites are actually within the Illuminati itself.
Yeah, that's a degrree, isn't it?
It's just a degree of the Illuminati.
Yeah, dude.
It's also used in the Scottish Rite in the in one of the either the 30th or the 32nd degree.
I know, I've heard it.
So basically, it's the High Council of the Illuminati to approve.
Maybe.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it?
Thank you.
All right. So let's go ahead and wrap things up, brothers. Thank you all for getting on. Eric, I really appreciate you doing this. This is awesome. And I will try to render this into something that can be posted onto YouTube if anyone wants to share it after this.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Man.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Brother.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Sorry I got Peter the Great and Frederick the Great mixed up. Maybe they shouldn't have the same last name.
All right.
All these great guys.
And it's good to see everybody who they communicated
Good to
to,
see you.
you know?
Yeah, good to
But
see
Eric,
everybody.
finally,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Eric, beautiful. I like the way your brain work, man. Not all of it, but part of your brain I like.
You are hereafter Erik the Great.
Oh,
great.
no.
Frederick is my man. Frederick versus Maria Theresa.